Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth. You know, it's a simple fact that you just cannot get a clean thing out of an unclean thing. A poison tree only bears poison fruit. As the black grassroots continues to aggregate more support, the white media is stepping up its efforts to do counter-programming. The white media made their first major moves against us 5 years ago. As the Black Lives Matter protests began to spread, the white media would do their on-the-scene reports, but instead of finding inaudible, unintelligible people as always, instead this time they found young people armed with an entirely new vocabulary, one that clearly didn't come from CNN or MSNBC or Urban Radio or any of their black bootlicks. That's when they knew they had a problem. Somebody was influencing these young minds, and the kind of talking points they were hearing, they had only heard from the black media. And so it was during the Baltimore uprising that the white media as a group decided that they were going to cut way back on those man-on-the-street interviews that they had been doing. From then on, they would retreat back to the cozy comforts of their sound stages in the network studios where they could control who got in front of the camera and what they would say. But that wasn't going to fix the problem. The black media, who the white media spent the previous 10 years trying to ignore and wish away, had now grown in power and influence. White media needed a phony black grassroots movement of their own, who they could use to deceive all of those rowdy young black people and get them going back to running in circles again. They first tried to trot out some hand-picked front Negroes, all a clumsy front for what were LGBT organizations. Black Voters Matter, Human Rights Campaign, National Black Justice Coalition. The griot led the charge on that one. It was CNN, however, who introduced the world to D. Ray McKesson, and he was the belle of the white media ball for all of a hot minute. But then he tried to go out among black people in the community, and he was predictably called out. The white media realized that he was damaged goods, and his jersey, or should I say blue vest, has since been retired. Then there was Byron Allen and those A-dunce clowns. Allen used them for a quickie photo shoot, and after he got his latest courtroom payday, he disappeared, and so did they. They all figured if their puppets simply used a little bit of our language, a little bit of our lingo, then all the white media would have to do is to use its own massive platforms to give these charlatans exposure, and black people, especially the young, would be typically gullible and stupid and mindlessly follow them. That's the formula. Just carpet bomb the black public with TV spots showing these chumps pretending to talk tough. And because the white media has a veritable monopoly, they knew everyone would see these clowns and they would fall for whatever they said. And why not? The white media had been doing it for over 150 years. Only problem is, we had already inoculated our audience against the white media's tricks years earlier. We made it clear that if it didn't come from us, then it's not to be trusted. We educated our audience that if you see some black person on TV or on radio and the white media isn't attacking them, then that's 3 red flags they're an agent. Some Negro parachutes in, seemingly from Mars. You never heard of the guy, don't know who he is, where he comes from, or who his people are, and the white media's heaping all of this favorable press on him. That lets you know they're trying to build him up in the eyes of black people. We taught our people how the white media tries to invent legitimacy for their chosen shills, how they try to credentialize them, so hopefully we'll see them as credible. And for years now, not only has it been impossible for the white media to manufacture any more black leaders who they control, we've also managed to delegitimize the clowns who they had been using up until now. Career bootlick and black feminine Agent Duvernay has been trying to manufacture attempted black cred for herself by talking about black issues. Netflix has been her patron, giving her high-profile PR pieces such as 13, which was her documentary about the 13th Amendment and the prison-industrial complex. Then after that, they gave her money to make a drama about the Central Park Five. Never mind that Jason Black had already covered that topic 1 year earlier, and he did it 10 times better. Now she's making a docudrama based on Colin Kaepernick. While I acknowledge the value of Kaepernick's taking a knee and the movement it began, and the legitimacy that was behind it, I gotta say, though, I can't salute his current choice of friends. Over here, we judge people by the company they keep. But the white media had learned the hard way that merely imitating just a little of our verbiage isn't enough. Black media is far more than the words we use or the positions we express. To be black first, you have to be actively advocating for the total destruction of the white media and the sick system of white supremacy that it represents. You have to make it where the people who benefit from it realize that the free ride is over, and you're the one who's going to bring it to an end. Black bootlicks, however, can't do that. They got to make nice with the white media. They have to make nice with the white powers that be. They can't be leading a full-scale assault on white supremacy. No, they got to walk down the middle and preferably pull you back toward the pale side. At most, all they can do is speak in feeble vagaries about the evils of racism and about how more needs to be done. And then it's back to telling us to vote for racist Democrats because that's somehow better or different than voting for Republicans. So individual bootlick spokespeople wouldn't work. We had checkmated the white media on that one. So they've now embarked on a new strategy to manufacture entire phony black news groups. We've already damaged the griot and the weed, the root, a few years back. Those websites are basically blogs with worse journal entries. So last year, the white media launched its latest attempt at counter-programming against us, BNC, or as they call themselves, Black News Channel. These guys came out of nowhere, and yet they seem to have sufficient resources where they could at least have a studio to broadcast from. They're also being carried by a number of cable providers, but it's not until you look behind the scenes that you understand they're just another white media front. BNC was actually dreamt up by J.C. Watts. For those of you too young to remember, during the 1990s, J.C. Watts had the infamous distinction of being the Republican Party's only black member of the House. He was the GOP's black mascot for the 8 years he was in Congress, and a shameless apologist for all the racism coming from the right. Like John McWhorter, J.C. Watts feebly claimed to be his own man and speak his own thoughts, and yet, like McWhorter, all he did was repeat what his bosses wanted him to say. Watts enjoyed being seen as exotic in white Republican circles. It made him feel special. Now, while I don't necessarily hold it against him that he didn't want to caucus with the Black Immigrant Caucus, or that he chose to take some digs at Jesse Jackson, that doesn't erase the fact that this guy was nothing more than a shameless apologist for racists in the GOP. He did everything that he could to lick their boots and their behinds clean. But as Republicans captured the White House in 2000, they quickly let old JC know that his butt-kissing services would no longer be required. He resigned from Congress after only 8 years. Watts had been allegedly mulling over the idea of a black news channel for a while. That's to be expected. That's what happens when these bootlicks inevitably get shown the door by their white pals. They come crawling back to the black community. Doesn't matter if it's Stacey Dash, Omarosa, or J.C. Watts. But Watts didn't come back alone. He brought a partner, or rather an owner, with him, Bob Brillanti, who is the owner and CEO of Black News Channel. Yes, a white man is the owner and CEO of Black News Channel. You can't make this stuff up. And he's not the only one. Asian American businessman Shahid Khan, who owns the Jacksonville Jaguars, he's an investor in the BNC too. Kinda reminds you of the NAACP now, doesn't it? You got all these non-black people who think up these black organizations, then they find some black front people to stand out front and say that they're the ones who run it when they run nothing. Rather than focus on what black people are saying, they wasted no time making it clear they were just another black puppet for the white media. Their YouTube channel's very first video stars Corny Booker. Yes, this Corny Booker. Here he is talking to the Manhattan Institute. I think I told you all about them in my last Sunday video essay. Apparently BNC was having some sort of coming out party in New York. You had a couple of members of the Congressional Immigrant Caucus there, and of course, no bootlick jamboree would be complete without the breakfast schlubs. BNC isn't about news, they're about infotainment, hopefully having black folks see a couple of high-profile Negroes who the white media had given some coverage to, and I guess they thought that would be their ticket to ride. They're not about news at all. They're about clout chasing. And speaking of clout chasing, Mark Lamont Schill used his sideshow on BNC to attack Bill Cosby being freed from prison. Schill went overboard putting on a performance that I guess he hoped some white cable executive might see by accident. He wanted to show how outraged he was that this black man had been released. Outraged! But then Judge Joe Brown crushed him on that one. They still have that posted on their channel. Apparently, nothing is able to get eyeballs except for people who talk like the black grassroots. And they know it. But then Schill had a few interviews, or rather arguments, with Rizza Islam, and he wanted to do nothing but argue with that brother as well. So Schill is well aware of the people who have the ear of the black street, that he and his bosses are so desperately, pathetically trying to get control of. However, there was one group from the online space who Schill didn't dare argue with. In fact, he was courteous to this one group in particular. Schill tried to get some mileage from the desiccated husk of the A-Dunce bowel movement. He wasn't trying to tear down that laughing stock. By the way, did I mention that the A-Dunce operative that Schill was so friendly towards is LGBT? And while I have nothing against LGBT, the truth of the matter is, if you set up an organization and try to call them black because you're trying to attract black people so you can artificially bolster your numbers, that I do have a problem with. But Schill is trying to trick people into thinking that he's in the same orbit as the black people online. Say, why doesn't he go to his pals at the Grio or the Root? Surely they can help his channel get some traction. But then again, he knows that nobody listens to them. Nobody cares about the old dead black media. That's why they're dead. The eyeballs are over here. We're the ones driving the discourse, and Mark Lamont Schill knows it. But attacks against black people was just the beginning of BNC's anti-black agenda. You'll recall that on September 19th of this year, I posted a video essay about the mayoral race in Boston. There had been 3 black candidates in the race, but not one of them made it past the primaries. Now, Boston is 25% black, but the 2 candidates running for mayor will be an Asian woman and a white woman of Polish and Tunisian descent, who the white woman only recently decided she would pull a Rachel Dolezal and claim to be a woman of color. I guess she figured that would get her some black votes. I told you this wasn't going to be good news for black Bostonians, but apparently the so-called black news channel thinks that this is cause for celebration. They actually posted a video with the title, "Two Women Make History in Boston's Mayoral Race." But neither one of them's black, so how the heck is this a good thing for black people to get drummed out of a race when they're 25% of the population? And the so-called black news channel says, let's celebrate these 2 non-black women who beat these black ones. But that's the point though, isn't it? BNC is pushing that feminist line. It doesn't matter if black people have been ethnically cleansed from the mayoral race. What matters is that this is a huge win for women. Yeah, just not black women. And this little video here didn't even mention that there have been black candidates in the race or how it was a bad thing that they failed to make it to the runoff. I guess they figured black people don't care about that. At BNC, black voters don't have any interest. Black people don't have any demands. Black people don't want anything. Black people are selfless martyrs for everyone else's well-being. That's what propaganda like this is meant to say. That it's okay to ignore black voters. Hell, even the so-called black news channel totally ignores black people when talking about an election in a city that's 25% black. There's no talk about demands being made of either one of these 2 candidates remaining. No talk about what their record is in regards to black voters. Nothing at all. Nothing. Instead, they were happy and acting like they were on CNN or something, which I guess is where most of the on-air talent for BNC would prefer to be at. But only a minute later, after being all pre-orgasmic over how great it was that this Polish Tunisian woman called herself a woman of color, they then talk about real estate developers running ads against the Asian candidate. And the biracial woman, she's on the right. This is what she chooses to say about that.
It got me thinking, like, why is development so scared of equity and of change? When we think about any cool place to hang out, it's because it's equitable, right? Jane Jacobs, in urban planning philosopher, says that neighborhoods are made by, musicians, right? Artists, the LGBTQ community, right? Like the cool kids, right? This is who makes up a neighborhood. And
by the way, the host of the show, the woman on the left, she's the one who blurted out the cool kids when she heard the term LGBT. This is how the so-called Black News Channel reports on the political race in Boston. The story ought to have been all about how wrong it was that 3 black candidates were on the ballot for the first time, and all 3 of them were eliminated in the primary, didn't even make it to the runoff, and what this means for black political clout in Boston. But they didn't care about that. There was no mention of what either the Asian or the newly minted woman of color was going to do for black Bostonians. You would have thought this was MSNBC or Bloomberg the way that they were talking. This is your Black News Channel. Now, this all happened just last week on October 27th. And just in case you thought that BNC ignoring black people was just a fluke, the very next day, Charles Blow, on his BNC show, was lamenting that reductions to the size of Biden's Build Back Better plan was going to hurt Latinos. And he didn't talk about Afro-Latinos either. The woman he was talking to, she's a mestizo, one of these Latinos who identifies as white. So in the span of just 2 days, just last week, Black News Channel was celebrating the Boston mayor's race having 2 non-black candidates on the ballot, without ever mentioning that there had been 3 black contenders. And just the very next day, they run a segment bemoaning how Latinos would see their share of the federal Build Back Better money reduced. Well, I do happen to have a suggestion for that last part. Maybe they can console themselves with the $1 million per household money that the Dems are hoping to give to illegals who the Trump administration separated last year. So when you tune into the Black News Channel, this is what you can expect to get. But then again, what else would you expect from a media outlet created by a black Republican and a white entrepreneur from Florida? BNC is about LGBT advocacy, just like these other front organizations were, and pushing the interest of immigrants, anything but black people. This week, they're hoping to get some traction by doing a story about Killer Mike. Killer Mike has been all over the place when it comes to political positions. So you have a clout-chasing organization covering a man who is political clout-chasing. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. These days, Killer Mike says he's trying to organize a voter drive. Whenever someone talks about organizing a voter registration drive, it reminds me of the line that John Travolta said in the movie Primary Colors, "And once you've gotten everyone registered to vote, who are they going to vote for?" The BNC that reported on Killer Mike, they made sure to mention, quote, "It's also important for black and brown communities to have their voices heard." By the way, did I mention that this piece was written by a Nigerian immigrant, Tade Abeji? Now, when you go to his BNC profile on the website, all it says is that he had 4 summer internships at the Voice of America and spent almost 2 years as a production assistant at the same station. But when you dig around, you eventually find, going on his Wixit site, that it says that he directed a radio show in the Nigerian service of Voice of America. Now, when it comes time to talk about Latinos having their piece of the Build Back Better pie reduced, it ain't black and brown, it's just brown. But when it's time to talk about black people, well, we got to throw other people in there too. We can't just talk about black people in isolation, don't you know? I mean, what do you think this is, a Black News Channel or something? What a joke. And we can't leave out Roly-Poly Martin. For people who think that BET is too highbrow, Roly offers his own brand of idiocy, jokes that fall flat, and opinions so stupid you would have thought a lobotomized gerbil came up with them. Now, on their face, these chumps are a bunch of clowns, but as I told you about the Manhattan Institute, while the front people for these organizations are a joke, the big white money behind them is anything but. This is total anti-black propaganda, not even disguising its contempt for us. Now more than ever, you need the black media, because there's a bunch of fakers, frauds, phonies, and fools who white money is pushing on us, claiming to speak for us, and all they're truly speaking for are the interests of every non-black group they can find. Their goal is to change the discourse away from the threatening of white supremacy that the black media has managed to effect, to get us focusing on everyone else except ourselves. We're making demands right now. Demands that threaten white supremacy and the bootlicks who it had been feeding. So they have to go all in on derailing us, bringing in billionaires like Shahid Khan in order to create these phony baloney black news organizations that are supposed to be the antidote to what the real black media is doing. This is not the time to slow down, this is the time to double down. As I told you about the Manhattan Institute, the bad guys may have these billionaire investors, but we've got two things that they don't have. We've got the truth, and we've got you. And that's no small thing. You're the one who they're using all this money to try to deceive. They're setting up these phony front groups with the hope of deceiving you. You're the one who's going to decide whether or not they succeed or fail. If you don't listen to them, that's going to hurt them. When you listen to, support, and spread the word about the new voices of black media, that wounds them. So please don't underestimate the importance of the part that you play in all this. You're the prize that everyone is contending for. The bad guys are trying to make up for their complete lack of black support by trying to buy some black credibility in the form of a phony baloney black front group or 3 or 4. Send a message and make it a strong one. That when it comes to the black street, all that pale money is no good around here. Good day, and be one. Black media only exists because of you. If you value the kind of uncompromising commentary and insight we offer, you can hit us up on Cash App and be sure to follow us on Twitter. The links are in the description.